Welcome to the Below the Line podcast. My name is David Duggan, and I'm one of the members of a team made up of experts from the worlds of business, elite sport, adventure, and health and well-being. We are coaches, mentors, and advisors to some of the world's biggest companies and organisations, as well as smaller businesses, entrepreneurs, and people looking to make their mark on the world. Whether it's leadership, business, coaching, health, or just life in general, we're really talking about performance. Our ability to show up as brilliantly as possible into all of these situations for ourselves and those around us. Each week, I sit down with a member of our team to discuss a performance-related topic connected to their area of expertise. We keep it short and sweet so that you can extract all the good stuff and get on with the rest of your day, and hopefully put some of our knowledge, experience and expertise into play for yourself. As we move into the autumn here in Ireland, it seems that we are on the cusp of yet another fork in the road on the COVID-19 journey. With this in mind, I asked my colleague Dave Duggan to give me his thoughts on where businesses and leaders are at right now and what he sees as being some of the key traits and characteristics they're going to need as they navigate their way through this next phase. Please subscribe at www.belowtheline.ie where you can stay up to date with our podcast as well as exclusive online events and sessions, including our latest story coaching program, which kicks off virtually on Monday the 15th of November. Find out more by visiting www.belowtheline.ie/story. Thanks for listening and see you next week. I suppose there's a sense out there, certainly as you look around, that things are not so much going back to normal, but we're coming out of one kind of phase of COVID, if you like, and we're potentially going into another. What are you seeing out there, that in terms of where a business is at right now?
Yeah, it's it is really interesting, and even that word, back, going back to something, it is being used and it's being constantly corrected then as well, which is we're actually going forward to something, we're moving forward into our offices again or into a new phase of our business again or whatever it might be. Right now, most business, I'll slightly generalize here. Maybe as a backdrop, my experience of the portfolio of businesses I'm dealing with is, whilst some of them had a very difficult time at the start of COVID, all of them, thankfully, pretty much all of them, got on their feet, found their new feet, if you like, which meant that, they had maybe slightly trimmed down businesses or they evolved their businesses into some new activities and rebuilt them in new ways. And then some businesses weren't impacted that much at all. And then a few businesses got what has been called the COVID banks, so they got a real benefit from COVID. And they were a smaller group than the rest, I guess. Right. And then I'd say from that time of finding their feet to probably the start of this summer, in my experience, sort of mid to end of June, they've been busily doing well in general, but probably fading in the sense of just tiredness and the grind of the lockdowns and the relentlessness of what people had been in. And whilst it hasn't all been bad, it's still been relentless, so sitting in the proverbial, I call it the proverbial box bedroom, a day in, day out, on calls, day in, day out, and doing well. There was a sense of people wanting to really draw breath over the last couple of months. So in my experience, the last few months, quite a few people have stopped, for the most part, drawn breath, stepped away, traveled, whatever that might be, and given themselves a chance just to breathe. And I think in the expectation that what's ahead from September on, the sense of, schools coming back, businesses, coming back into offices on a staggered basis or on some form of basis is beginning to happen, not in all my clients, but in many of them. So there is this sense that we're going to move into a new phase, and that's exciting. And people are sort of bracing themselves for it and getting ready for it. So there's a lot of preparing going on around, reconnecting people, setting up safe events where they can bring their people together and build that reconnection. And so a lot of that going on. And I think, yeah, so that's what I'd say about the businesses. And generally, the mood is very positive, so generally I've got businesses in, retail, utilities, tech, pharma, pretty much you name it. And they're all pretty optimistic in a business sense about the future. Whilst there are new risks and there are new challenges, there are also new opportunities there. So in general, I'd say people are quite positive. And positive also that we are moving into a living with COVID sort of context. And I say that in a very much European context. And I have some clients in the US, Asia, and even in Australia, and it's a bit more mixed there. I mean, the US is has sort of gone in and out of different phases, so it's a bit mixed. You go down to the opposite side of the planet, and it feels like where we were in January, to be honest. And Asia is a little bit in between, but Europe seems to be anyone I'm dealing with in Europe seems to be in a pretty positive place. Yeah. So they're looking forward in positive anticipation as to what lies ahead, and knowing that there'll be lots of new things in that, as there has been in the last 18 months. So that's where people are at. Yeah.
And you've probably touched on this already a little bit. You mentioned people drawing breath and kind of pulling back in anticipation of September, but where in general do you see leaders being at right now?
Yeah, I think leaders, I think I'd nearly put them into two buckets, which is overly simplistic, but for the sake of the conversation, I'll keep it, just it's my way of sort of understanding it. There are those that want to, and I'll use this word, want to go back to the way it was. So let's get everyone back in the office and doing things the way we used to do them. And it's bringing up lots of stuff for people. Like, for example, sometimes that's, in my humble view, the right thing to do. One of our clients, as you know, David, have a phrase called clarity is kindness. And I sort of like that idea. And I think that's generally good guidance, which whatever you're going to do, whether it's going to work or not, make it clear. So I think that's, to be fair, the guidance I'm giving. And to be fair to most leaders, that is their nature anyway. Let's make whatever we're going to do clear to our people. And if they don't like it, we'll work with that in whatever way that works, or indeed the people themselves will. So bucket number one, if you like, is people wanting to go back to the way it was. And as I say, I don't generally hold a strong view on that one way or another. Specifically, when I look into certain businesses, looks like the absolute right thing to do, both because of the nature of the business, the cultural nature of the business as well, and in terms of the going forward, in terms of retaining and attracting the best people, it looks like the right thing to do. And then there are others that are definitely going into the much more hybrid model and saying things will never be the same as they were before. I think this is the majority, and they're holding that view. Things will never be the same as they were. Generally, that's a good thing, but the word of not sort of caution, but where they're cautioning themselves in some ways is, I don't know what I don't know here. So I sort of think I know what the first thing is, which is we might bring, our people back on a staggered basis. But we're not entirely sure how that's going to work. And I think my expectation is that there will be lots of little things in that will be really big insights and discoveries, in terms of how do you run a meeting when you've got 2/3 of the people on site in the meeting room and 1/3 of the people dialed in, and the subtleties and the energy and the casual conversation at the start and the casual conversation at the end and all of that type of stuff. So and that's just one of 100 different things that will become issues, not necessarily negative ones, but become issues and be part of the new dynamic. So I think a lot of leaders are cautioning themselves not to be too definitive about what they see happening, because in truth, nobody's been here before. So so light on their feet, agile, without getting too cliched about it. I know it is one of the buzzwords right now is we need to be agile within ourselves, agile in our leadership, agile in our organizations. I think, yeah, I think for leaders, it's the personal agility. It's just not getting too fixated and fixed on things when there are still so many unknowns. And you can look at that both ways. So you can look at that as a threat or an opportunity. Personally, I see it as an opportunity. Some will see it as a threat to, efficient business operations. But yeah, that's where leaders are at. And I think the other question leaders are asking themselves is, what is this new context asking of me as a leader? And I think the question is more important than the answer at this stage. You could have any amount of answers to that. And I think in the next couple of months, leaders will be reflecting and saying, this situation is asking me to be, whatever that might be. I mean, one that comes to mind is, I think it's going to ask leaders to be even more empathetic, to be really tuned in to where your people are at, because I was reading a McKinsey report sometime in this year, I can't quite recall when, where they talked about this concept that there will be quite a shift in the workforce when we come out of COVID. A lot of people will have done a lot of reflecting, thinking about their work and where they work and how their employer has dealt with the situation. And there'll be a big shift. There'll be a lot of people moving around organizations. And I'm already beginning to see that, where people are now making their career choice and saying, well, look, I was thinking about leaving here and now I am going to, or whatever. And I think there's a bit of that bubbling up as well. So I think we're in for quite a change in lots of ways over the next 3, 6, 9 months, in lots of perspectives, culturally, the way we work, where people work, movement of workforces, all those type of things are all going to become a little more pronounced over the next while. Yeah, definitely. Which are all going to present new challenges for leaders.
The phrase that just jumped out at me there as you were talking was personally agile. So organizations, you're right, organizations have to be agile, but I think it's one of the mantras I got from you was, businesses don't perform, people do, or the people in them perform. So this idea of organizational agility is really predicated on leaders in particular being personally agile. So, would you have any guidance based on, again, your role as a kind of a coach and a mentor in organizations, big and small, around this idea of personal agility?
Yeah, well, I have lots of thoughts. I think, we've talked before about fixed and growth mindset, but I think, leaders with a growth mindset are going to find, with a strong growth mindset, are going to find these times, they're going to bask in them, to be honest, because there are so many things shifting and changing. There are so many possibilities for how things can be. There's so many opportunities to get things exactly the way we want them to be. So if you like, everything is potentially in a bit of flux, and there are far less fixed assumptions around than there were. So that's an opportunity to actually, continually, shape strategy exactly the way you want, shape structure the way you want, shape culture the way you want. And, I think, my advice to leaders is to see it that way, because it's just a way of framing the context we're in. Some will come to that very easily. Others will come to it less easily. But I think any decent leader will have to come to it to some degree that way, or they will find the situation that we're in, and possibly have found this already, to be too much of a stress, where they, for example, that early example I gave you of people coming back into the workforce saying, now I want it back to the way it was, where I can see everybody and we can control everything and have everything, just the way it was. For sometimes in that example, for no other reason than that's what made me feel safe. But actually, I think a lot of those leaders are going to find the next 6 to 9 months very, very stressful, because the actual world has changed, and that may not be the answer. Now it may be, but not for those reasons. So I think the personal agility is to see this as an opportunity to evolve, and to see it as an opportunity to personally evolve. My guidance generally is whatever is fixed, call it fixed. So whatever we can make clear and fixed, call it so. But I think that'll be very few things. And like, for example, what we can call clear and fixed is we're all in this business together. We can achieve great things. We don't know what all those things are yet. There are so many moving parts. We are all committed to each other. We are committed to delivering, a strategy that's going in a particular direction. But we also have to be committed to the idea that we're going to have to sometimes bob and weave and change decisions and find new ways and innovate and all of those things to get there. And that's the way the world is going to be. And that's going to be the fun of it. And I think if leaders set that context, which many are doing, to be fair, if they set that context and embody it themselves, not just in terms of what they say, but how they're living and how they're showing up, then people will follow it. So sometimes leaders sabotage themselves accidentally, where they will talk about agility, but they don't look agile. They don't look like they're adapting. They don't look like they're changing. They don't sound like they've changed. And sometimes they're not even aware of that. So leaders have to embody that, if you like. I hold the view that, we are heading into a renaissance. I think we're heading into a renaissance where there is a genuine awakening around climate change. I think, hopefully it's not too late, but there's definitely an awakening. There's an awakening around managing our own health and well-being, because we realize that actually our greatest defense against, lots of potential diseases is not just vaccines, but our own immune system. And, there's a lot of big awakening going on. And now, if you're a cynic, you might say, yeah, but there are, lots of problems. And I get that too. But I hold the view that, what's ahead of us is potentially a renaissance in lots of ways. And it's for us to embrace it. And our businesses and our people are the people who are there to benefit from that and indeed make it happen. So, yeah, I just think leaders have to have that sort of very growth, positive, agile mindset and way of being. And I think that's what people are looking for, to be honest. Even if it is challenging, that's what people are looking for. But to me, it comes down to the subtlest of things. It's not about big speeches and big strategies. It's sometimes people are watching the smallest things. Does Dave look like he's agile? Does he look like he's coping well? Does he look like he's thriving? Do I sense that from him? And if I do, gosh, I'd follow that. And that could be Dave or Miriam or anybody for that matter. So it boils down to that, in my view.
Last question then, which I think is the most challenging thing you've raised, really, is the showing up with agility. What does that kind of look like to you, in kind of in practical terms or in real terms, if you like?
Well, I think the traits, there's so much written about leadership, and there's, this is very much a personal point of view, because, others, if you ask 10 people that question, you'll definitely get 10 different answers, and I probably wouldn't argue with any of them. But I think, in my view, I think people are looking for leaders who are hopeful about the future, who can see what there is to hope for, both in the world we're in the business world we're in the personal world we're in. So they want that. They want people who are, if you like, showing the way on how we live that, in terms of how they manage their energy, treat people with care and humanity. I think that's going to become, and I even though it's been a very topical subject for many years now, it's going to become even more so. So, what do we really care about? I think it's going to become a much bigger issue, not just humanity, but you take the wider humanity piece and you can talk about, the world itself and global warming and all sorts of things. So I think those type of things will matter a lot. I think people want to be around optimistic people. They want to be around empathetic, highly empathetic people. I think they want to be around people who are courageous and who are for something, and who are ambitious and going for something. So I think a lot of the time people are in companies that are they feel they're very benign. So it's like people want to be part of something, going on a journey to somewhere, be excited by it. And in any organization I deal in, that's absolutely possible. And in most cases is happening. So it doesn't really matter what the industry is. All of that can be embraced. So I think, those sort of traits are what we, I would be encouraging people to embrace. But sometimes the challenge with that is it's not in them. So there's something underlying that makes it hard for that to actually come through. And that has nothing then to do with anybody else except themselves. And that's where sometimes a bit of just working on themselves can help a lot, because, everyone's an individual, and the last couple of years have been tough, and they've played on people in different ways, because we've all been in our own unique circumstance, notwithstanding the fact that we're all in it together. We are and we're not, we're actually all in our own individual piece, trying to manage it. So that applies to the leaders, the leader, when you think of, somebody at an apex of an organization or a team. But so it's a big ask for some. And for others, they absolutely have the energy for it, and they're wildly excited about it, and they're already at it. And and I think for the most part, those people are people who work on it.
Yeah, I suppose the thing I'm picking up from you, and it's a big theme in our work, we, as you know, in Below the Line, is this idea of consciousness. So, to be able to live this kind of stuff, you've got to check in with yourself and say, well, how am I with things like change, and how attached am I to the way things were, or possibility of not knowing, or that type of stuff. So it sounds to me like there's a consciousness check there that some leaders may need to do on themselves or with themselves, to kind of make sure that they're going to be able to lean into greater agility in themselves first, and then their organization or their team or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I would say by Christmas, I'd love to hear, and I will hear, a lot of leaders on what has the last 3 months, or the last 12 months for that matter, asked of me, and how is that any different than 24 months ago. I'm looking forward to just, hearing what that is all about. Because in some ways, and so that'll be interesting. And I'm speculating with my own answer, but time will tell.
Yeah, sure. Well, fantastic, Dave. That was great. Thanks a million.
No problem. Thanks, Dave.